Really happy to be joined today by Reggie Pacis. He's an immigration attorney and shareholder at Butzel Law, practicing out of the firm's Detroit office. He manages a variety of immigration matters, from H-1B to L-1, to labor certs, immigrant visa petitions, and a whole rest of alphabet soup of immigration law. And so I'm really happy to have Reggie here with me today. Reggie, how are you?
How are you doing, Fed?
Doing really well. I really appreciate you joining and coming in from Michigan. Hope the Michigan summer's treating you well.
Oh yeah.
Um, so yeah, to sort of start things off here, can you tell sort of the audience a little bit more about your background and what led you into immigration law, and then maybe sort of what areas you're focused on now in 2025, where that's all led you?
Yeah, so as you can tell, I have a family background in immigration. My parents came over here from the Philippines 65 plus years. I'm not trying to date myself, but yeah, I mean, you can't beat the clock, right? So, and then they eventually met here on this side and came in here and became, eventually led to U.S. citizenship. I mentioned my parents because I have an interesting story. My dad told this story at my wedding. So, my he was married to my mother, and back then he was a lawful permanent resident or green card holder at the time, and he was sponsoring my mom, who's a J1. J1s have a 2-year conditional home residency requirement, and generally, you're supposed to return home to bring their training expertise that they gain here to their home country, which is the Philippines. And so she had a 2-year conditional residency requirement to return home. So they were married, and she was pregnant with me, 9 months pregnant, when she went to the immigration office for the interview on the. They were trying to waive the 2-year requirement because you can waive that if you can demonstrate extreme hardship.
Uh,
Now, again, I'm dating myself a little bit. This is like 50 to 60 years ago. They go into the immigration office back when you could do this, and back when they could sponsor for the green card right away for a spouse, for a green card holder sponsor for the green card for spouse. And my dad was using the argument that you can't send my wife back because she's 9 months pregnant. That presents a health issue. And the officer agreed. There was an extreme hardship case made. They waived the 2-year requirement. She got her green card, and she's been here ever since, with the exception of a few trips outside the United States here and there. Now, fast forward to my wedding. My dad told that story at my wedding and said, "Hey, so Reggie, I was the first immigration lawyer. I got you in." And so I told them, and then years later, I went to the 30. They had their 30 plus 35-year-old wedding anniversary, and I told them that story again. I said I've been waiting for like 10, 15 years at the time I was married to tell this story because I want to tell my dad in front of all these folks saying, yeah, my dad made the argument, but you didn't get mom in. I got mom in. So when you ask me how long have I been doing this, I can say I've been doing this since before I was born.
there you go.
So, that's the stories. But long story short, I mean, I think it was a good area of law. This was one of my top areas I was interested in. I remember family members. I used to be one of the kids at the old INS building doing the crossword puzzles while their relatives were trying to straighten out their immigration paperwork and stuff like that. So that used to be me. And the idea of helping people who were vulnerable legally appealed to me. And then I went to law school and then eventually got a job with a small law firm, learned immigration law that way. Also interned with the Archdiocese in Detroit, learned immigration law that way. And then eventually an offer came at Butzel Long here where I'm at, and I've been here for 25 years. So and I've been practicing for almost 30. So that's my career in short.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if we want to spend the whole time on that, but that's my answer to your first question about how did I
No,
get into
it's a great
that.
it's great, and it was a great story about your dad. It's probably one of the more unique answers I've gotten from an immigration attorney on this
Yeah, I
podcast.
figured that.
Think
Yeah,
you'll hold that mantle for a little while at least.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I talk with immigration attorneys every single day, and some are like me, and they sort of just came into the space, maybe a year before the first Trump administration when everything got turned on its head, and some are like you who have been in this world for 30 years now and have seen all of the different evolutions of U.S. immigration policy and the landscape, and sort of the demand for immigration legal services. We're 6 months into the Trump administration now. I'm curious for you and for your practice, what have been, maybe the two or three biggest day-to-day changes that you've dealt with in terms of your practice and working with your clients?
Well, the thing from the human side of things, I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are afraid, including employers. I do a lot of business immigration. Employers are afraid too. They're afraid for their employees. They're afraid of getting raided. They're afraid. They want to, they're doing their best to follow the law. But the thing is, one of the changes we see in the Trump administration, we saw this during the first Trump administration too. There was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of norms that we could not rely upon before that are just being upended. Before this call, I had a discussion with a colleague about Venezuelans, whether they're authorized to work or not, and how to advise employers on how to deal with a Venezuelan. And the employer has to walk the fine line between, okay, if you get rid of the Venezuelan because of what you've heard in the media, that Trump has pulled the ability to stay and work for those people. Um, you could be also subject to a lawsuit by the Venezuelan if it turns out you're wrong. So the employer has to walk a fine line. Am I violating a government rule? Am I going to be sued by the employer later on for employment discrimination? I mean, they're trying to do the best they can. That's the main thing, that the norms are just upended, and we can't rely on what what happened before. With the first Trump administration, that norm and all that issue got upended by the COVID pandemic. That just threw everything
Right.
out of whack. So we were kind of like on a big, huge pause button and just trying to deal with clients who were here, who couldn't leave because they couldn't travel and all that stuff because of COVID. This time around, we don't have that. We don't have COVID as a pause button, so to speak. And that it was a terrible time. Also, I might add. But here we've seen action by the government where they're doing potential raids. They just passed the big beautiful bill, so they have the funding to do it. Um, things like that. It's just the uncertainty that's going on, and you just can't rely on things. And here you are trying to navigate. I feel like before, when you're a lawyer, you're navigating people, but here it's like um, you're really navigating really choppy waters, and it's really hard to get through. So that's the biggest change, if I can, of all the policy shifts, without getting into details on how each policy shift could be that way. I mean, I like the birthright citizenship. I've executives who are foreign nationals here. They're like, "Is my kid going to be a U.S. citizen?" I said, "Apply for that kid's U.S. passport right away." You know,
Yeah.
stuff like that. That's example. They would never would have thought of doing that right away. They thought just have the baby, get settled, enjoy that. No, they got. I'm telling people to apply for the passport even though they're an infant. I mean, because I'm an immigration lawyer, I've had the luxury of having gotten passport photos for an infant child. I have two boys, and when they were kids, I can't tell you how hard it is to try and get the right photo where you're holding your child upright, with the white background, so you can get them a passport card. Now, because of our proximity to Canada here in Detroit, I wanted to make sure they had the proper documentation so we could go back and forth and visit our cousins and relatives in Canada. But now, I mean, people need to do that for just being able to document their immigration status, or their in this case, the U.S. citizen status. So that's just one of many examples. So
Yeah, I think it's one of the more important overarching themes, and I do a podcast every Thursday where I recap the week's immigration news, and I release it on Friday. And I do this for a living essentially, and it's impossible for me to keep track of all of the new policy changes, all of the headlines, all the trends that are coming out of the news on immigration policy, and a lot of them are sort of hidden right under the radar. A couple of months ago, when the State Department paused appointments for F&J applicants, was sort of a sneaky one that they didn't talk about. It was just released in a leaked cable by Politico. With your clients, how are you sort of balancing? You need to manage, just the day to day work of moving cases forward, getting them filed, getting approvals, with what I imagine is an influx of emails, calls, inquiries from clients worried about things like, the birthright citizenship headline in the news. How are you balancing that in the early stages of this administration?
just doing the best we can. I mean, we're trying to respond to all inquiries and take each inquiry as they come. We're fortunate enough we actually just retooled and added some staff to help all of us out. But I'll be honest with you, it's a struggle. You know, uh, in preparation for this podcast, I was trying, we exchanged a couple of emails. I couldn't respond to you until late last night because because of what's been going on. So, and we also had our immigration group meeting where we invited our firm summer associates, and they heard us just talking all sorts of stuff like this. And then one of the summer associates finally raised her hand and asked a question. Says, "Is this normally how your meetings go?" And no, without question, all the immigration attorneys and paralegals all said, "No." And that's how it's been every month. I'm just trying to keep contact, keep in touch, and trying to manage case flows and stuff like that. So because before there was a big huge backlog of things. Now it's even worse. And so we're trying to figure out ways to scramble and keep their employees and people at status as best we can. Some cases we have some people who come to us who are out of status, and we try and manage that as best we can as well. But I mean, I've actually told people who are applying for visas, you got to watch what you put on your social media. You
Yeah.
got to watch what you see on your phone. I've actually had conversations where, like, not that we have anything to hide, but we might want to take this discussion off email and just go talk on the phone because email is not the best mode of communication to communicate complex legal issues. But B, I don't know that I want to breach the confidentiality of this person that I was talking about because they can have their phone access and stuff downloaded. And plus, our emails can be misinterpreted in a negative way. I have to be careful. I don't want stuff to be misconstrued in an email by an immigration officer who's reviewing stuff when I'm just telling people, okay, here's what our conversation, our understanding of what you're doing here in the United States is, or whatever. That's all. Because immigration officers, they're supposed to be suspicious, right? But they'll take his anything and turn it into the possibly just to maybe to see what the reaction is of the person they're interviewing. They'll turn it into something negative. And of course, someone will say something that can be interpreted as something that could lead to a reason to deny them the ability to enter. You know, so
Yeah, and there's not a lot of so far there aren't a lot of specifics on these social media vetting procedures with the State Department, with the USCIS, with CBP. There's some vague some vague guidance around support for terrorist groups,
yeah,
anti-American activity, but the anti-American sort of sentiments is pretty tough to that's in the eye of the
yeah,
beholder in a lot of cases, right? It's a very
right,
subjective
right.
measure. So, yeah, I could see that being a difficult one for your clients. But yeah, the other thing, I like to ask every attorney on this podcast is because there's only so much you as an attorney can do when it comes to how the government is acting in terms of immigration or how they're handling your clients' petitions. And I know, to the chagrin of some of your clients who think that sometimes immigration attorneys can do anything and you can force the government to do anything. You can't. There's a lot that's out of your hands, but in terms of the things that are in your hands as an immigration attorney for both yourself, your team, your practice, uh, what are some of the biggest internal bottlenecks that you face in your practice when it comes to getting cases across the finish line for your clients that you're currently addressing
So
there?
internal bottlenecks. So sometimes making sure that we have all the documents that we need, all the information we need. Similarly, making sure that the client or the client's employee has all the information you need or all the documents they need. Um, I'll give you an example. So one person was asking me a simple question: Can I travel? Right? And I had to look it through their documents and stuff like that. But I asked the question. I responded, "Tell me what you have in your passport in your possession right now." I mean, I have copies of his H-1B visa that expired, but I also have copies of advanced parole. What would basically I was trying to say, what would you show the immigration officer if you were trying to enter the United States right now? So he says, well, you have all that stuff. I said, I know I have all that stuff, but I want to make sure what you have and what you would present. So he sent me and he told me what he had. And I said, you didn't tell me you had your advanced parole document. I know you have your advanced parole document because we sent it to you. Do you have your advanced parole document? Oh, yeah, we've had that. We've been going back and forth. Again, a discrepancy in the communication via email. Right. Okay. Well, just use that and that should be fine. That's all he had to say. All he had to say was I had my advanced parole document. Instead, he just said, am I, me and my wife okay to travel? Because really, when they say travel, they're worried about whether they can return to the United States or not. All right. So I said,
Yeah.
well, you're okay to leave. Question is, are you okay to return? I try to be a little humorous about it. And I told this person, I said, so you don't, you said you sent me everything you have, but you didn't, so, because if you just sent me that little snippet of what you have, that's not going to be enough. So we chatted about that. And then, then that was about, that would have been a 5-second discussion like we just had here, but it turned into like a 30-minute email. Sometimes people just need to just
Right.
talk on the phone. I guess I'm old school, either talk on the web camera or talk on the phone because, sending emails, realize everyone wants everything by emails, but it's not the best form of communication. It's also readable by the government and someone can misconstrue or
Mhm.
misunderstand. I mentioned earlier about the government misconstruing, but there's an example where the client employee did not send me everything. I said, "Send me what you have that you would enter." I thought that was a simple explanation. He sent me a copy of his expired visa and his passport. I go, "Well, you're not coming in with that." You go, "Well, oh, but," I said, "'Cause here's your advanced parole. Do you have it?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, I have that." I go, "Why didn't you tell me that?"
Well, that person was probably even a step ahead of some of your other clients. I was an immigration paralegal for a few years, and sometimes clients don't tell you, that they're traveling until they're at the point of entry or at the airport and they're having trouble getting back in.
Yeah, that's happened, significantly more than the conversation that I just had with as an example. Although those the preventative conversations are starting to happen more often than after the travel conversation. So,
That's a difficult that bottleneck, that example you just gave is one I would say it's probably the most frequent one that I hear from immigration attorneys, and it's difficult because similar to not having control over the government, you don't necessarily have control over whether or not, your clients or the foreign nationals, who work for your employer clients, are sending you all the information you need or giving you, timely updates, when you need them. Um, and that can create a lot of fires that need to be put out, but also a lot of email backlog, phone backlog, things like that. Have you found that during the Trump administration that because immigration is such a hot button issue in the news, there's a lot of scary headlines around it, that your foreign national clients are a bit more communicative with you than in the past, or not
um,
necessarily?
a little bit more communicative, um, a little bit more. I would only say that, I don't know if I'm gonna date myself. So I remember a book called The Firm by John Grisham. It turned into a movie with Tom Cruise as the main character. And there's a line, and he was a tax lawyer. And there's a line in that movie where he says to the FBI agent Wayne Terrence, who's played by Ed Harris, and he says, "Why did that's exciting. I'm gonna get conspiracy, mail fraud, billing and stuff." He goes, "Hey, it's not sexy, but it's got teeth." Immigration is not sexy, but it's got teeth. All right. And I remind people of that all the time. I mean, it's got potential for criminal violations, potential for people from being barred to the United States. So I always tell people that all the time. And sometimes people still don't get it. They still, like, people are just asking us because they think we're travel agents. So, I need a new passport or I need this. I'm like, you know, you got to, and then they get mad at us as to why things are taking so long. I go, watch the news, read everything what's going on. The layoff of government workers is an impact on this because there's less people to do the work that they need. I mean, I don't want the government to compromise its ability to keep us safe as well. I mean, but they have less people to do their work. And also the immigration thing is viewed very skeptically. And I always tell people the same guys at the border who you run into are the same guys adjudicating these petitions that you see. So, we got to give them everything. We get one shot. In baseball, you get three strikes. Immigration, you get one. So, when I say I'm asking for stuff, don't just sit here and dilly dally by responding saying, "Well, what's the latest status?" I go, "No, here's my email chain. Um, you know, you still didn't answer every single little thing. You answered one. And I'm not trying to do this to be a pain. I'm trying to do this to make everyone's lives easier. But yeah, but that still happens, unfortunately.
It's one of those bottlenecks where there's really,
Yeah,
unfortunately, no perfect solution for it. I think it's just something that's part of the job, and immigration attorneys will always be dealing
yeah.
with in some sense. But, sort of another question that I'm always curious to ask immigration attorneys, especially folks like you who have been practicing for decades at this point, is I imagine you've sat in a meeting, with your peers at your firm before, and you've tried to come up with ways to make your case flow management more efficient. Maybe it's a new technology tool, maybe it's changing process, maybe it's adding headcount, adding more paralegals, more assistants, more attorneys, things like that. What's one of those initiatives that you've put in place in your career that's been really successful and has really helped increase the efficiency of your case flow at your firm?
Oh, geez. Well, if we're going way back, we used to do everything by hand where we'd have to print out a report as to when everyone's I-94 documents are expiring. Um, Now we get email notifications as to who's expiring in the next 6 months, the year, or whatever, because I can change those settings that I want. And then that's when I contact people. So that's one efficiency that's helped. The other thing is the whole web-based thing when, we went from desktops to going web-based. I mean, being able to give people access to their forms to help us finish off the stuff. And it's funny sometimes, most people are pretty honest and and responsible. But it's funny sometimes that they always try and people always try and sometimes blame the attorneys for what happens, what goes wrong with your criminal defense attorneys or even immigration attorneys. And I'm like, how am I supposed to double check your answers? I mean, you're the one who gave us this data. We operated on the basis of that data. I'm not trying to put the onus on you, but at the same time, you got to own some accountability as well. Because if you'd answer the question the way, like I was just on the phone with someone we were just having a conversation in the hallway where someone failed to disclose that they were expedited removed from the United States subject to the 5-year bar. You know, they failed to disclose that. So our office sent them to an interview. That's a big one. Sent them to an interview and they said, no, why was I barred for 5 years? And then they come back to us and say, did you guys know about it? It's like, no. And he sent us in the past copies of what he had available about his narrative about how he was refused entry years ago, but he left out possibly that last page that would have told us what the decision was. That's a kind of a big deal. That would have totally changed our strategy on how to bring him in. So now we're telling him how what the new strategy should have been from the beginning, but now that we know this information and it's been confirmed, he was under the impression, oh, I just withdrew my entry. They just sent me back. I go, okay. You're sure about that? Yeah, I'm sure. Okay. See, here are all the documents I was given. Doesn't say any of that. We looked. Last page was missing. So the final page. Oh, I don't have it.
It's a
Yeah.
really difficult one. I mean, at Lawfully, we create software tools, right, for the whole post-filing process. So that's sort of our niche in the market, that, we're trying to create a better mousetrap for immigration attorneys and for foreign national consumers. And we interact with all of the other, immigration legal tech companies that are trying to build point solutions for different things, make it easier to collect documents, all that stuff. Nobody can build a software tool that can get foreign nationals to give you all of the information that lawyers need to make sure that they can do have 100% of the details to put together the right strategy 100% of the time.
My
So
wife's a lawyer, but she's in real estate, and she gets the same thing in the real estate thing. Not that people intentionally hide stuff, but she doesn't have all the information. That's getting all the stuff that we need to know is probably one of the biggest challenges. So
what about on the flip side? Have you ever, in your career, you and your team, you put together a new initiative to make your case flow management more efficient? You're really excited about it. Maybe you add on a new technology tool, and for one reason or another, like it just flops. It doesn't work, or you don't ever implement it. It just sort of fizzles out. Do you have an example of that?
yeah, well, so we also get involved in global immigration where people come in, but also people go out because some of the executives or specialized knowledge workers like engineers have to go to other countries and get projects. So we toyed with the idea of getting access to the forms and just giving people a head start on stuff. Um, we don't do that as much anymore because what we ended up doing, what we ended up finding was that you really needed to get involved in getting licensed in the country, the target country where you have to go. So we ended up just working and referring to a foreign. We started leveraging our networks with other foreign law firms, and then just basically doing the handoff, but still being involved because there may be some things that happen with the foreign visa application process that may impact the U.S. immigration issue. So we still stay involved. And before we try to do a little bit more of that, but then there became licensing issues where you have to be licensed in the target country. Plus, then there's all sorts of nuances you happen to know because you practice in that country. So we kind of shied away from the global aspect of our practice in terms of trying to do it without um, licensed attorneys as much as possible. But so we have leaned heavily now on more using more foreign law firms. It just, I mean, yeah, it's one thing to have the forms and just do it like a dual visitor thing, but and, we always have to have some knowledge because we have to know which foreign lawyer we're going to tap to help us, because we have to know which the right expert. But in terms of the forms thing, we just kind of didn't do that anymore because it got more, it just got less reliable. When it was not we were, the amount we were investing was just not worth the return.
Heard this. Yeah, I've heard the same story with firms that I've worked at, and with a bunch of other firms that I've talked with as well. Where global is such a every country has their own system. The systems change as often, if not more, than the U.S. system does, and not being able to rely on partnering with a local counsel in those places, it just seems to be one of the better models that most immigration firms fall back on. Makes total sense. Well, I have two sort of more fun questions that will take us out of reality for a minute here because why not? The first is so late last night, the new USCIS director was confirmed by the Senate. You saw that Joseph Edlow was confirmed by the Senate. So there's now a full time USCIS director in place, and he's going to have his list of priorities going into USCIS in the ways that he wants to change the agency or what he wants the agency to focus on. But let's pretend that he's not the new USCIS director, but you are. And on day one, you could make like one change to do employment based immigration. You could do agency operations, anything you want. But one change to make to the immigration system, what would it be?
Well, it's just reduce the backlogs, but that cuts across everything. You know, the visa bulletin is like severely backlogged. I mean, why do we need a visa bulletin to limit the number of green cards? These people are here. We're scrambling to keep their status here, and we've got their green cards in a certain stage where they're poised to have it finished, but they can't because of the visa bulletin. Snap that backlog out of there. I mean, John McCain and Ted Kennedy tried to do it with the McCain-Kennedy Act of I think 2009 or 2008, and unfortunately, it had bipartisan support, but not enough to get it passed. So I don't know why we need to limit um, green cards for people who are already here. You know, just get their case out of the system, and
Yeah.
then that will alleviate the burden on some of the immigration issues of the other backlogs. So I mean, the overall thing is get rid of the backlogs, and I just gave an example of how you can get rid of it. Right? Get started on it.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I think it's smart. I think one of the things that we're keeping an eye on at Lawfully because we have early access through our database of sort of what the case processing trends are at USCIS is whether or not we might see a repeat of 2020 when some employment based green cards were wasted. Because of the rifts at USCIS, because of the return to office policies and all the disruptions that happened from that. We have former USCIS officials join us for that meeting that I invited you to a couple of weeks ago. There's actually one in 30 minutes here, and they've been talking about sort of the repercussions of the first month of the Trump administration coming in and really reshuffling USCIS are increasing process delays and backlogs increasing and maybe even green cards getting
Yeah.
wasted again. So you hope that the current director will agree with your sentiment.
I mean, if I could be Congress president, Congress the president, I'd add, why do we need an H-1B cap? Let the market decide. The market will tell us whether we need that many H-1B workers or not. Why are you capping it at 65,000? That's based on numbers of 1990. Why do you need that? So, I could go on, but
We used to ask that question. That's how I used to phrase it: is if you were the czar of immigration, what would you do? And most immigration attorneys are like, oh my, let's get started. There's so many like the H-1B cap. But yeah. Okay. Well, last one for me. This is a little bit more localized, but if you all of a sudden got access to the best software engineering team in the world, and you could create any technology tool to make your immigration practice function more smoothly, more efficiently, help with some of the bottlenecks that you're dealing with, what would be the first tool that you would ask them to build for you?
well, if I'm not trying to suggest that I become like the Borg in Star Trek: The Next Generation, but if there was a way that I could just, I need a document, I can think it, and it appears, or the documents all appear, that would be great. That would be great from the system or from the client or wherever. You know, um, that would be ideal. Right now, we're just toying with the idea of how can we get documents scanned and entered into accurately. AI is great, but it's got to be accurate too. That's one of the bottlenecks we're trying to discover here. We're experimenting with some tools about how to be able to access our library database of documents. And when I say documents, I mean not only past employer reference letters. I'm talking about memos that we've saved and also our library of information that we have. So we're toying with that. But if there's a way that I could just think it and it's there, that'd be great. You know,
That's a really good one. You're the first person to suggest that as a new tool. It might be a few decades away thinking it, but maybe voice, you say it into your phone and it can pull it up right in front of you.
Well, I have full faith and credit the ability, Bluetooth. I mean, I'm not advocating for someone with getting brain cancer either, but I don't want to, like I said, I don't want a cybernetic implant into my brain either. But if I could read my pattern, my brain pattern saying, I was just thinking I need this. Oh boy, that'd be ideal because then I'd probably be able to get answers out more quickly, and rather than typing, doing the old Scotty from Star Trek, hello computer, just be able to tell people and think the answer right there and it's done. Now I realize that's maybe a couple years, couple decades away. And there are obviously some moral implications with that about cybernetic implants or being able to read your brain thoughts and stuff. That would be nice.
Well, Reggie, this is a really fun conversation. I really enjoyed learning more about your background and your practice and some of the things that you guys are working on at Butzel. But we can wrap it up here. First, tell the audience where they can find you and how they can reach out. And second, is there anything you're working on, anything you're doing that you want to plug?
Well, so how to reach me? I'm Reggie Pacis, and my email is pacis@butzel.com, PCIS at Butzel, BUTZEL.com. Direct dial phone number is 313-983-6929. That's like my direct dial. I could give you the firm's general number, which is 313-225-7000. But I'm here. I'm usually in the office. And if I'm not here, all the contact information gets forwarded to me anyway with our phones and laptops and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, that's how to reach out to me in terms of projects I'm working on. Well, I don't know. I'm just trying to live my life in like 2 or 3 hour increments. I'm just trying to get through the day. So
Well, Reggie, I really appreciate you coming on, and we'll have to talk again soon.